Hey, Belle. Hey, Belle. Hey, everyone, it's Chris here, and right now I am in Alaska, sitting in a flower bed of beautiful purple lupins right in the middle of bear country. So I'm going to have my eyes in the back of my head a little bit just to make sure a black bear or a grizzly bear doesn't wander up. But I'm here in Bartlett Cove in Alaska's Glacier Bay National Park. We're working on another episode for our series on America's national parks, and you can probably hear the gulls and crows and an occasional float plane flying over. There's a bald eagle in the sky right now, and every so often I can hear the spout of a whale in the water in the distance. It's incredible. I wanted to let you know that we're expanding this season of The Wild to include 3 different types of episodes, so you'll be getting even more great content from us every week. First, there's our new series on America's national parks coming out every 3 weeks. We'll also be presenting episodes featuring interviews with the sharpest minds in wildlife conservation and nature, and dipping into our archives and sharing our favourite shows from the past with new commentary from me. Today, I have something really special to share with you. Over the years, we've put on several storytelling events, and listeners tell stories, true stories, about their transformative experiences in nature. On this episode, we're going to share 3 of our favourites. This first story was presented live on stage in McCaw Hall in Seattle. It starts with a walk in the woods in Alaska, which turns into something completely different. Here's storyteller Monty Monteperry.
I was in my truck, driving into the darkness. It's fall in Alaska, and I was heading east across the state toward McCarthy. McCarthy is a little redneck hippie town at the end of a 60-mile dirt road in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of this nation's largest national park, Wrangell St. Elias. Don't feel bad, nobody has heard of this place. It's at the toe of a glacier, confluence of 2 rivers, surrounded by some of the most beautiful mountains on the planet. It might be the most magical place in the world, and I did not want to go back there. I thought about driving all the way back home to my parents' house in Colorado. I called my parents, and in over a decade as a wilderness guide in Alaska, I had never heard them so concerned for my well-being. This was different. I was devastated. The night before, I was sitting in Anchorage on a couch. I was excited to celebrate my 2nd wedding anniversary with my wife. We'd been living apart that summer. I was living in McCarthy guiding. She was living in Anchorage pursuing her own professional goals. She was staying with friends. It was their couch. It smelled like 2 kids and a dog. She turned to me and said, "I cheated on you 2 years ago, before our wedding in McCarthy." I crumpled into the linoleum, whimpering. It's not what I expected to get for my 2nd anniversary. I hear cotton is traditional. But as the night went on and the more I found out, the less I felt like I could deal with any of this. And when it was finally revealed that it wasn't once, it was an affair, I told her I didn't feel safe there anymore. And I hugged her, I told her I loved her, I got in my truck and I drove away. I will never forget the first day I stepped foot in McCarthy, Alaska. This place was just waking up from being a ghost town. I felt like I'd rediscovered Colorado in 1970 as my parents had always described it. Dirt roads, sleeping dogs. It's the kind of place where you could go to the one bar in town and be sitting next to a gold miner and a mountain guide and the mayor. And the mayor was a dog. And I was 20 years old. This place was a blank slate for me, and I knew how small towns work. Your actions accumulate over time, and eventually your character is seen by all. I kept my nose clean. I treated people with respect. I made my way up from a first-year guide to part owner of the guide service. And even though life there can be hard sometimes, I felt protected by that place. As long as McCarthy respected me and my wife loved me, then nothing else mattered. And as I drove back into town that day, I didn't feel either of those things anymore. Some people had known the whole time. Now it felt like everybody knew. I was the last one to be told my own terrible secret. I couldn't bear to go back to our cabin alone, so I went to stay with my best friend Chris and his wife. And they cared for me because I was incapable of doing so for myself. I had no appetite. It was hard to sleep. When I did, I had horrific nightmares. Being awake hurt. I've never had an emotional injury manifest such physical pain. If this is what it was going to be like to live, I wasn't sure I wanted to keep doing that. So after a couple days of that, I wanted to give Chris and his wife a break. Because it's difficult enough living in a one-room cabin in remote Alaska with your partner without having your broken-hearted buddy crashing your living room / dining room / only room. So when my buddy Chester asked if I wanted to crash with him for the evening, I took him up on that offer. Chris and Chester live in the same subdivision, but I feel that term is grossly misleading in this context. Think less suburbia and more a collection of shacks, shanties, cabins, tree houses, and permanently parked school buses connected by a dirt road bulldozed through the forest. So I followed Chester through the woods to his cabin. I'd met him 10 years ago that first day I got to McCarthy. We immediately bonded over a love of punk rock music. And our dogs are sisters. And that night, we pulled an all-night heart-to-heart, where I told him that this entire thing felt like the last act of some great Greek tragedy that had been specifically constructed to use my own pre-existing flaws as the very means of my destruction. I told him I had always struggled with my masculinity and that I felt completely emasculated. I told him I'd always struggled to control others' perceptions of me, and now the thing that I would like to be the most private was most public. I told him I was angry, but I didn't know what to do with it. I wasn't letting myself feel it yet because it was so intense. I woke up that morning with my 85-pound husky mutt dog on my chest in her most aggressive version yet of, maybe you'd feel just a little better if you pet a big furry dog. Chester and I got up and drank coffee, which I do, and smoked cigarettes, which I don't do, but that morning it felt like I should. And I smoked the shit out of some cigarettes. And then I left, and my cell phone died, and I realized I'd left my sleeping bag back at Chester's. So I go back, I put my sleeping bag over my shoulders, I go to leave, Chester stops me, and he puts his hand on my chest. And he says, "You have an infinite well of power inside of you." Which, if you knew Chester, you would know is a very Chester thing to say. It was just past peak foliage. The bright yellows were mottled. Leaves dead but not fallen yet. And I walked into the woods alone. My dogs had gone back to Chris's for breakfast. And I felt alone. I felt like my marriage was a lie. I felt like my whole life was a lie. I felt like I died on that couch. I felt lost in the world. And then I realized I was lost in the woods. I was actually lost. Which wilderness guide lost in his best friend's backyard? I was crushing it. In my defense, it's bushy back there. And Chester's the kind of dude that meticulously doesn't walk the same way just to keep it wild. Regardless, I'm disoriented. I'm trying to gain my bearings. I take a step forward. A twig snaps underfoot. I look to my left, and there's a 750-pound grizzly bear 25 yards away from me. Right? I've had a decent amount of bear encounters in my time in Alaska. I've even been mock charged by grizzly bears, something they'll do usually at a greater distance. It's their version of pounding on their chest to assert their dominance. I've never had any animal look at me the way this bear looked at me, roared, and charged immediately. There was nothing mock going on here. This was worst case scenario. I had just startled a fall-time grizzly in the bushes. I turned my head to run, which you are not supposed to do. But in my defense, it is a difficult instinct to control when presented with something this terrifying. And in that moment, I knew exactly where my bear gun was. 5 miles away on my bedside table. I didn't have any other bear spray, which is my preferred means of protection. I scanned the area for a tree to climb, somewhere to hide. There isn't one, because there never is in Alaska. What you're supposed to do in the rare event that you're attacked by a grizzly bear is play dead. Lie face down on the ground to protect your organs. Put your hands over the back of your neck to protect your spinal cord. And then let the bear maul you. Only if the attack persists. Fight for your life. I'd felt mostly dead for 4 days now. I felt like I'd been getting mauled by the world. I felt like the attack had persisted long enough. I turned around to see the bear barreling at me through the bushes. I planted my feet. I put my teal and lime green sleeping bag over my head. And when I opened my mouth, as if it was being ripped out of me, came all of my pain and confusion and directionless anger in the form of a gut-wrenching, eye-bulging, vein-popping, primal scream. And the bear stopped. But now the bear was very close. So close that this time when it roars, I saw spittle shoot off of its lips. Its hot breath cuts through the cold morning air. But I wasn't going anywhere. I just found out I don't want to die. And if I am going to die, they're not going to find me in my friend's backyard with claw marks in my back. So I looked that bear directly in the eyes, which you are also not supposed to do. And I dug down deep inside of me, past the burst bubble of McCarthy and the shards of my broken heart, to a place that was not broken, a place that cannot be destroyed. And from that place, I roared, and then I charged the bear. And I don't think it's what the bear expected, because it looked pretty confused and huffed and ran into the bushes. Many longtime Alaskans would tell you the moral of this story is simple. Carry your bear gun, you stupid hippie. But for me, it was immediately much more profound. I felt like the natural world had just warned me that this experience was going to summon my own personal demons in their most intense forms. And if I tried to run or hide from them, they were going to kill me. If I was going to survive, I was going to need to be brave, stand my ground, and look them right in the eye.
That was a story from Monte Montepare. Our next story comes from an event co-hosted with Story Collider. Storyteller Paul Barak shares his trip along the Pacific Crest Trail. As a warning, this story does include mentions of suicide and self-harm.
So I always hated memorizing dates in history class, and not because I always got them wrong. I mean, that mostly wasn't it. It's just that it never made sense to me because, like, for real, who cares when some event fell on the calendar? You know, what matters is how the world changed afterwards. And that's what I thought for decades, until my world changed on one specific day, October 23rd, 2015. That's when my girlfriend Meredith killed herself. It was impossible not to love Meredith. She had a voice of a cartoon mouse and this big snorting laugh and just an inability to not say everything she was thinking. And she was complicated, self-centered but fiercely supportive of you, and perky with just the darkest sense of humor from dealing with depression and chronic illness. But right off the bat, she let you know that you could stop pretending to be normal around her and just be yourself. And I think that's what I love the most. We met through stand-up comedy and instantly just fell into orbit. We had as much choice in the matter as gravity. And we weren't perfect. We dated and broke up, but stayed in orbit. Until finally we decided to quit fighting gravity and give it a real shot because we loved each other. 11 days later, she was gone. And I was untethered from gravity, floating through cold, empty space. At first I was shattered, and then I was just numb. This chunk had been torn out of me, and I had no idea how to process that much grief. And so, because therapy is expensive, I moved to Denver and just toughed it out. Got a new job, made friends, eventually tried dating again, but every day was a countdown to the next October 23rd, which I knew would be a bad day. And I was right. I wake up and it all comes rushing back. The phone call from her roommate, hyperventilating the shock, her mom collapsing by her casket, the dress with the high collar they put her body in, and the particular weight of all the words that I wish I was saying instead of goodbye. But I toughed my way through work and then drank my way through the rest of the night alone in my room. And when I woke up the next morning, the countdown started again to the next October 23rd. And I knew that day would be just as bad, and I would be doing the exact same thing. But then, things got worse. There was another suicide that tore the rest out of me, and since therapy had not gotten any less expensive in 1 year, I left to hike the Pacific Crest Trail, which sounds impulsive because it is. But I've never been shy about leaving my job to, say, walk a Buddhist pilgrimage in Japan or bicycle across the United States, because I've just never fully bought into this. So the Pacific Crest Trail runs 2,650 miles from the deserts of Southern California up and over the Sierra Nevadas and over the Cascades into Canada. And that first day on trail, I'm worried. My bag's overpacked, it's already too hot, and I might not finish this thing. Most people don't. I could get injured or run out of money, and then where do I go after that? Where will October 23rd not be waiting for me? But 2 miles in, I look up, and even in that burnt desert, it is so pretty. There are these red hills and blooming cactus flowers and this unfamiliar feeling that I cannot name wriggles through my chest. And as I continue on, the numbers start falling off the calendar. I mean, there are days on trail, sunrise to sunset, and sometimes deep into the night, but they're not numbered. I'm just here, on trail, alive. And there are bad days, injuries, burnout, wildfire smoke, vomiting until I was sure bones were coming up next. And, the news, when I do get it, is always bad because, well, we all remember 2017. And the worst thing is, I'm deep in grief, and people I know keep dying. Older people from heart failure and suicide, and people my age from brain cancer and diabetes and suicide because it's a national epidemic that we all really need to start talking about. But even at its worst, there's a comforting simplicity to each day and progress. I wake up, and with simple effort, I will lay back down a couple dozen miles later, having seen at least one thing along the way that fills me with awe. And it could be something small, like sunlight hitting just one fern in a thick forest or cat paws sparkling on a lake. But usually, it's something huge. Full moons in the desert and stars like a floodlight through black silk, and mountain glaciers glowing pink in the sunset, or one time, after 10 days in a thick forest where there were more mosquitoes in the air than air. Stepping out into an open meadow where all the mosquitoes transformed into butterflies. And each time my hand would go to my heart, like I'd been shot by awe. And day after day, that unfamiliar feeling keeps blooming in my chest, growing into the place where the suicides had ripped out. And it's not just awe or wonder. It's something else that I cannot name for months, until one evening, I'm racing up Muir Pass in the Sierra Nevadas, and I crest the rise by a stone rescue hut and see this oil painting sunset and just start crying. Because for years, I've been focused on toughing out the depression and the grief, but out here, life isn't something I have to endure. It's something I can love. And as Orion emerges above me and tears stream down my face, I keep repeating, I get to be alive. I can't believe I get to be alive. I'm so lucky. And a week later, I'm sitting on top of Half Dome in Yosemite National Park, feeling lucky, staring out at this churning ocean of white granite and just wondering how I'm supposed to return to the default world after this. But it can't last forever. I'd skipped around the Sierras and come back in September, and so after Half Dome, days begin to matter again because they are numbered. The countdown has started to the end of the trail, back to the default world, and to October 23rd. I step off the trail on October 8th, and pretty quickly, things get worse. I walk across the Golden Gate Bridge back into civilization with just a biblical amount of wildfire ash raining down from a dark sky. And then I catch my flight home, staring out the window at the Pacific Crest Trail below me, and all the wildfires consuming this place that meant so much to me. And when I land, things are no easier. I've got no job, no apartment. October 23rd is approaching, and really the only thing I have to look forward to is meeting up with this acquaintance from back when I did stand-up who'd just gotten back from her own big journey, a university fellowship where she'd gotten to travel through 10 countries for 8 months. And she'd messaged me to say, hey, welcome back. You want to meet up sometime and talk travel? And I'm like, yeah, I love talking about myself. The only problem is she's heading back out of town, so there's only one day we can meet up, October 23rd. And so I say yes, and then spend that week counting down to canceling. And when I wake up on October 23rd, reliving the worst day of my life, I write the text to cancel, but I don't send it. I don't want to sit alone in my room again. I want to talk about Joshua trees reaching up towards desert moonlight and how blue Crater Lake is and how godlike Mount Rainier is and what Half Dome's like from the top and mosquitoes transforming into butterflies and how sometimes you just can't believe how lucky you are to be alive. And also, how was her trip? And so we meet up and we talk about life and travel and laugh until the bar kicks us out. Because of the Pacific Crest Trail, my life has now changed twice on October 23rd. It's the day Meredith killed herself, and it's my first date with my wife, Michelle. Life is complicated. Even the worst day of your life can also be where the best days of your life begin. Thank you.
That was storyteller Paul Barak. If you or someone you know are considering self-harm, you can call the crisis hotline for help and support at 988. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, a story about how a lifelong love of nature and science culminates with a temporary life-ending jolt from the sky. We've been hearing some amazing stories from our listeners who joined us at an event co-hosted by the Story Collider. Next up is an electrifying tale from storyteller Kim Weaver.
You can learn a lot growing up way out in the country, surrounded by woods and fields, and nothing but dairy cows as neighbors. By the time I was 12, I learned how to drive, how to shoot straight, and how to gut out a deer. I learned how to tend a huge garden to help feed my family. I also learned how to entertain myself and how to be best friends with a farm dog. And when my best friend took a face full of porcupine quills, and I was the only one she trusted enough to let near her, I learned how to carefully snip off the end of each quill so that it would deflate, making it easier to pull out. Let me tell you what, folks, in the zombie apocalypse, you want me on your team. I have skills. I also learned the memory verse every Wednesday and Sunday at church, and once a quarter, I learned every obscure fact about some random book of the Bible so that I could absolutely crush it on the Bible quiz team. But there were limits on what you could learn and what it was okay to ask. All kids are naturally curious, and they ask things like, why is the sky blue? Or maybe even, why do bad things happen to good people? But I pushed it. Like, where exactly is hell? And who thought that that was a good idea? Or, why was I born a girl when it was made very clear to me that everyone involved really would have preferred a boy? And one time, I was very concerned that, birds live in the air and fish live in the water, and they both really love to eat worms that live in the ground, and that seems very inefficient to me. But the only answers that I could get from the adults around me were, it's all part of God's plan, or because God wants it that way. And even as a kid, I had a suspicion that what adults meant when they said that was, I don't know and I don't care. And sometimes I think they also meant, you're a really weird kid, But then I found science, or science found me. It was in an 8th grade science class, and my teacher, Mr. Lines, shout out to all the teachers in the audience, whoop, whoop. We were learning about stars, and I asked a question about sunspots and why they formed and also why they went away. And his face lit up, and he said, Kim, that's a great question. I don't think anyone knows yet. And my heart and my brain opened like a supernova. In science, the unknown was not unknowable. And questions, they weren't dangerous. Now, don't get me wrong. I still went to church twice a week. I got promoted to captain of the Bible quiz team. But at school, I also competed in the Science Olympiad, and I was the captain of the mathletes. For those of you who might not know, those are mathematical athletes that do math competitions. Yeah, that's a real thing. And I loved all the science, even the stuff that the other kids found boring or really confusing or just plain embarrassing. It's 10th grade, and the unit in biology class is reproduction. And probably because she's horrified to say these things out loud to a group of 10th graders, our teacher is having us go around the room and read a paragraph one at a time. And while I'm wrapped with the tension of things that were certainly never discussed at home, I'm equally horrified as my classmates say things like fallopian tubes and testes out loud. It's almost my turn, so I count ahead to see what amazing and horrifying science I'm going to have to read out loud. And I find my paragraph. And it says, if the male contributes a sperm that contains an X chromosome, the resulting child will be a girl. If the male contributes a sperm that has a Y chromosome, the resulting child will be a male. And I was like, okay, I'm horrified because I'm gonna have to say the word sperm out loud twice. But also eureka, now I know why I'm a girl. And I'll just let you all imagine how that particular conversation went down at the family dinner table that night. Not a lot of people where I'm from go to college, but my teacher saw something in me, and I was very determined, and I earned a full scholarship, and there I was on my way off to Bucknell University in Pennsylvania. And while my family and my community were proud of me, they were also really worried that I was going to go off to the ivory tower and get all sorts of new and dangerous ideas. And wow, were they right. I wasn't even fully moved into my shared dorm room when I found out that my roommate, who was like a very statuesque, pale, suburban Ohioan woman, I found out that she was a vegetarian. Like a vegetarian. Where I'm from, that's just code for bad hunter, you know? And my shock only deepened that first Sunday on campus because, of course, I had promised to go to church every Sunday. So I walked on down to the beautiful chapel on campus, and imagine my surprise when the chaplain is a woman. And she's wearing a long, beautiful robe that's embroidered with rainbows and birds. And her sermon was about something called social justice? Now, I was used to sermons that were like big, long lists of things that would send you to hell in a handbasket. But she didn't talk about any of them. She just talked about loving everyone. And I mean, that was just the beginning. My first year at college was truly transformational. When the year ended, I went back home, and my plan was just like keep my head down, work my summer job, and make it back to college in the fall. But people could tell that I was different. I didn't laugh at every joke. I didn't go to every single church function. And I didn't dismiss climate change and carbon dating as liberal hoaxes. People were talking, some of them straight to my face, about how my lifestyle was gonna send me to hell. And I'm like, now I'm the one in the handbasket? It didn't help matters when later that summer I was actually smote or smitten, smited, I'm not quite sure what the proper verb is there, like a bolt from the blue. All the science I knew then and all the science I know now can't really explain what happened. It was a scorching summer day that looked like it was right out of a child's drawing labeled summer. It was a blazing yellow sun in an unbelievably blue sky and no wind. It was hot. My family, we were all out in the yard doing chores. I was weeding the garden. My mom was hanging clothes on the line. My dad was mowing the lawn. And my best friend, the farm dog, was supervising all of us from a little shady patch under the lilac. And then there was that subtle change in the air. And you look up and you're like, wow, here comes one of those sudden summer storms. And so we scurry to put away the tools and the lawnmower and the laundry, and we decide to sit on the porch enjoying a cold beverage and cooling off while this storm starts to come in. At first, there's just a little bit of wind and a few fat raindrops. And then, bam! The first bolt of lightning out of the sky avoids the house and all the trees, jumps over the clothesline and the truck, sneaks under the porch roof, ricochets off the metal lawn chair that my mom is sitting in, hits me straight in the chest. It flung me 10 feet. I was face down, no pulse, no breathing. I'm dead. You look a little worried. It's okay. I was revived. But if there were any doubts, they were resolved. I had been smited. And everybody was wondering, would this be what it took to set me back on the righteous path? When people hear that I've been struck by lightning, there's a very predictable set of questions that I get, and I'm sure some of you are thinking them right now, so I'm going to run them down for you. People who are afraid that something like this could happen to them and want to believe that I was doing something stupid say, were you doing something stupid? Like swimming in a lake while waving a metal flagpole or golfing with a metal golf club? No, I was sitting on a porch under a roof, minding my beeswax. The religious and wary atheists ask, did you see a tunnel or a bright light? And I'm like, yes, you fools. I saw a bright light when the giant ball of lightning hit me in the chest. But no, No angels, no voices. I'm very sorry to disappoint you. People who have watched too many movies ask if I got superpowers from it. No, and now we're all disappointed. The squeamish ask me if I have any cool scars. No comment. But every now and again, I get another question, a good question, and really the only question that matters, which is, did it change you? And yes, I have to say that it did, but not in the way that people back home had hoped. Because there I was, doing nothing wrong. I had barely started living and learning, and it was almost over in an instant. And I decided, if you can do everything right, if you can follow the rules and still be struck down, why not live a little? So I resolved to have a very interesting life. And that's what I did. I just went. I've earned 2 college degrees. I've lived on 3 continents. I served in the United States Peace Corps. I've changed careers a few times. And I served aboard an ocean-going vessel that was so far out to sea for a month that at times the closest humans to us were the astronauts passing overhead in the International Space Station. And once, Michelle Obama took both of my hands in both of her hands and looked deeply into my eyes and told me that she was proud of me. But my interesting life, that's another story. Thank you very much.
That was storyteller Kim Weaver. I hope you enjoyed our listener stories as much as I did. Special thanks to the production crew over at Story Collider, Kent Whipple, Misha Gajewski, and Diego Villarroel. You can hear more about Story Collider and listen to their podcast at storycollider.org. The wild is inspired not just by nature, but by the people who work in it, love it, protect it. Places like this, in Alaska, where I'm sitting right now. Wow. The Wild is a production of KUOW in Seattle and Chris Morgan Wildlife, with support from Wildlife Media. This show would not be possible without listener support. You can help us to continue to create this special, immersive storytelling by donating to KUOW. Go to kuow.org/donate/thewild. Thank you. Our producer is Matt Martin, with help from Jason Burrows and Charlotte Duran. Jim Gates is our editor. The Wild is hosted, produced, and written by me, Chris Morgan. A very special thank you for the kind financial support to Jill and Scott Walker, Rose Letwin, Ellen Ferguson, Anna Kimball, John Taylor, Paul Lister, Bob Yellerlees, Barbara Stallman, and Barton Brooks. Our production team includes David Brown, April Craig, Marshall Eisen, Michaela Gianotti-Boyle, Tatiana Latre, Lucy Suchek, Kara McDermott, Amelia Peacock, Darcy Riggins-Schmidt, Brendan Sweeney, and Hans Twite. Our theme music is by Michael Parker. I'm Chris Morgan. Take care of yourself. I can't wait to share with you all that I'm learning here at Glacier Bay National Park in Alaska.